Excellent. Well, I'm going to kick this off. For those of you that I haven't had the pleasure to meet, my name's Brian Crater. I'm going to be the host and kind of MC for today. Thanks all for joining us. We might have people popping in and doing that as we go along for this next hour. Also, just want to point you on my screen to Becky, who's right over there. Mine's always backwards. Right over there, who's doing our techie. And so she'll be here supporting on that way. But the reason that we're all here, I'm excited to introduce Chris. And Chris, I want to say the last name is Reese Dubin. Is that correct?
It's Reese, like the cup, but with no E.
Thank you. Reese Dubin. So let me tell y'all a little about Reese Dubin. So he actually goes by the pronouns he's and him, by the way. He spent a majority of his professional career in youth development, 8 years in overnight camping and 9 years in day camping, from what it says here. During that time, once again, like so many, he's gone from the funk counselor all the way up to director to staff training. Once again, it's one of his big passions in going through that career as well. After slipping away, he ran his own camp called Transplanting, founded that, which is to create, and I love this, a safer world for trans youth and adults. Chris is a passionate speaker and trainer, which we'll soon be able to recognize. And I also love this, that once again, you know, with a background in theater, he likes to weave in the entertainment and storytelling, which is awesome and means that we'll all be captured. So there's more down here, and I'll let Chris kind of share whatever you like. But Chris, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for sharing this topic now for the second time and a little bit different with us. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, I'm so excited to be here an hour before I thought I was supposed to be. So again, hello, everyone. My name is Chris, and today I'm going to share my screen, and you're going to tell me if it is working. Thumbs up for working. Rad. All right, I'm going to get everything situated where I want them to be. All right, so today we are actually going to be talking about intersectionality and kind of what that means and what it can mean in a camp situation. You know, really working through what diversity, inclusion, equity, and justice mean in our camp spaces today. We have heard over and over and over again, kind of in the last 2 years, people are really ready to step into the space and do more equity and justice work. And I think there's a lot of factors that play into that we could talk about. But, you know, especially with trans kids, I have heard overwhelmingly that last summer people were seeing a surprising number of trans kids in their program, or non-binary kids, or people who wanted to share their gender identity. And if you really think about it, that makes perfect sense, right? Because everybody was home. Everybody was home for a year. And it kind of allowed folks to really think about who they were and what that meant. And then we kind of reemerged into society, and there are many pieces that people wanted to share. So I don't think that is going to decrease in number. I think a couple of years ago, when I first started doing this work, I was saying, you know, this is not an if. There's not going to be an if there's a trans kid in your program. It's a when there are trans kids in your program. And now is that win. So we are here, we have arrived, and we need to make sure that we know what we're doing to support people of all genders. But again, this is about intersectionality, which is a slightly different topic, but we'll definitely focus on some of those gender identity pieces as well. So that's me. My name is Chris, again, Reese Dubin, like the cup without the E. Actually, I work for Transplanting, which is a training and consultancy group working to create a safer world for trans youth and adults. In my day job, I'm not in the field of camping anymore for my day job. I run the Columbus City impound lot. So that's pretty much just the same as running a summer camp. People are remarkably similar who want their cars and I can't give them to as a 7-year-old who wants to go home because they're homesick. So I'm using all those skills every day, and I have a lot of things that I've learned kind of being in that space. But that's me again. 17 years in the camping industry. I am now gratefully traveling about the country, sharing this work with folks, and I'm so excited to again be taking on that expert role in the camping industry because people I truly think are ready to know what we should be doing. So when we talk about intersectionality, I just wanted to start with a grounding point. And this is a quote that I love from Bell Hooks, who's an author and a theorist. And that is, to build community requires vigilant awareness of the work we must continually do to undermine all the socialization that leads us to behave in ways that perpetuate domination. And there's a couple of things in there that I really love about this, is that so often and too often we talk about cultural competency as if it is a destination, as if someday we will arrive and we will be competent. And that's never going to be the case, because we are rebuilding our world every day. We're rebuilding social narratives every day. And we have to continue to learn these things and sit in those moments and reconsider the narratives to truly make sure that we're listening or paying attention to sculpt a better world. And then the other piece of this that is so vital whenever we're doing equity and justice work is that this system, none of us built it. None of us built this very biased system that we exist in, but we have inherited it in a way that we have to be working to deconstruct it. But what that does is it exempts us from having to feel shame about some of the behaviors that we exhibit, as long as we're working to correct them, as long as we are thinking through how to be a better advocate and ally. Shame does nobody any good. It really can keep us stagnant. It can keep us not moving forward and doing the work that, again, needs to be done. So what is intersectionality then? So basically, intersectionality is the interconnected nature of social categories, such as race, class, and gender. Obviously, all the other categories fit in this as well, as they apply to an individual or a group. So regarding how those identities intersect, how they intermingle, and then how that overlaps with this social structure, again, that exists in our environments of discrimination and disadvantage, or as we're going to talk about in a little bit, oppression and power. So intersectionality came into being. It was coined by this woman, Kimberly Crenshaw, in a paper in 1989. And initially, it was specifically about the experience of Black women, how we can't create, justice surrounding just Black or just a woman, because there are overlaps in our identities. So we have to make sure that we're addressing the full people and the full person and all the inequities they face based on kind of those intersections of their identities. So originally, when we talk about the origins of intersectionality, Crenshaw was specifically talking about racial equity, so fairness and treatment for people of all races, and gender equity, meaning fairness of treatment for all genders according to their respective needs. So from that, we get this whole beautiful, robust theory about all of the intersections of our identities. So you can see it here. And this is an image done by Sylvia Duckworth, which I really, really like, that again shows different intersections of someone's identity and how that compares to their position in positions of power and in positions of privilege. So if you look at the outside of this wheel, it's going to show you different parts of someone's identity that can be removed from power. So when we look at when we look at power and we look at privilege, it is a spectrum. You know, you're not either privileged or oppressed. It's a whole spectrum of everything in between. And based on all of these parts of your identities will really determine how your overall position in society is kind of cased, and the way that you are expected to behave and interact with this system. So this image is a little bit older. This is the newer one done by Sylvia Duckworth, which I really, really like. So you can see all of the overlaps. You know, when you look at someone, you can't just look at their race, you can't just look at their ethnicity, you can't just look at their gender identity. So for example, to talk a little bit about myself, right? Like I am a transgender person, and that makes some things in my life very, very difficult. And that, you know, that is just a reality. However, I am also a white transgender person, which means my life experience is vastly different than a transgender person of color. And then one thing that's not on here that is a little bit different, that even muddies things up a little bit, is I also pass, which means I can basically go into a bathroom and nobody's going to notice because I have this awesome beard. So it just makes it a little bit easier for me to exist. So although I do face some extreme oppression because of my identity, there are many ways in which I still interact with privilege. So you can see, as you think about your own intersections, how that might come into play. So when we think about a race, right? Like if you think about you're running a race, you always see the people who are in front of you, right? Like you always see the people who are winning, but you're not looking behind you. And this plays very significantly in social situations when we are constantly looking at where our oppressions are and not where our privileges are. So we all have to be keenly aware of the actual circumstances that we're facing in regards to kind of this system. Okay, so now here is the sad part, is that if we were all in person, this activity would be so fun. And it's going to be a little bit fun, but it's not going to be as fun as it would be if we were in person, because I'm going to ask you all a question, and you can answer in the chat if you will. So here is the question. These are all, and this is why it would be more fun if we were in person, because we would all be munching on delicious candy right now. But take a look at this, and I want you to take 1 minute and really kind of look at these collections of candy, and tell me which you think is the least diverse. And you can just put the letter in the chat after you've kind of made your determination. But then what I'm going to do is I'm going to request if anyone wants to come off mute to kind of share some of their feelings about why they chose what they chose. So which one do you think is the least diverse? G. Okay. Okay. Torn between B and G. Oh, I like that. B and G. Okay. 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 Like B as an option. Okay. So does anyone care to share if they picked A and why?
I might have been the only person, because it's all the same tone. It's visually non-diverse.
It's visually non-diverse because they're all the same color, right? All right. How about my friends who said B? Does anybody want to share why they thought B was the most, or the least diverse?
Yeah, I did B because it looks like the same, least like type of candy. The colors are different, but it's the same thing.
So all the colors are different, but the candies are all the same.
Yeah, same
right?
with
they're all jelly beans.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And G, yeah, go ahead, Jen.
And I did the same thing, but I picked B over G because there were fewer colors of the same type of candy.
Right. So then we get down to like counting colors, right? Which has the most one type of, trait, if you will.
So G has some that are broken. Look at G's,
Mhm.
and then some of them are broken.
Robin, so it's only a few people say this, and it is one of my favorite things to point out, because we can look at G and we can say, oh, well, they're all M&Ms, right? And they're all different colors, but some of them are broken. And if we're not looking close enough, we can miss that brokenness, when we talk about some of these things.
That's an interesting point, because my thought process with that was that if you take a bunch of M&Ms and you're carrying them around in a bowl, some of them are going to chip, but the jelly beans are stronger. So I discounted that as how long you've been carrying them around in your backpack.
Right. Well, that's right. That's really interesting, especially when you think about if you think of like actual terms of like brokenness, right? Like who's more likely to be hurt, who's more likely to be vulnerable. The candy in the backpack, whatever that means in our metaphor, is more likely to have a little bit more experience with being broken. And how do we make sure that we're taking care of that? So yes, like the vulnerability piece. Okay, so other thoughts? Did anybody else think any other or have any other observations?
Chris, I picked G because M&Ms all taste the same. The jelly beans taste different.
That's right. Right. So the M&Ms, they're all going to be if you close your eyes, you're going to M&M is an M&M. Right. If you close your eyes, a jelly bean is going to be different flavors. And you are going to have a little bit more diversity, perhaps, in that group. Tyler, that's an excellent point. I think this really kind of gets to the crux of one of the things I want to share with you all today, is that diversity doesn't just mean the way things look, right? There are two very specific types of diversity that we can talk about. And one is like who we are inside, that like invisible diversity. Like you think about so some like neurodiversities, some characteristics, maybe your religion, the way you think about this or that, or your political leanings, all these things. And then you have the visual. And so often, I have had this conversation with so many folks who say like, we need more diversity on our camp brochure, right? Like how many of you have had that thought or, heard that? And I think there's that representation piece is important, but also we can't just say we need more diversity because we don't know where those folks are from or their experiences or, where they fall in the economic system. And so diversity means so much more than the way things look. Great point. So thank you all so much for sharing those. All right. On the flip side, which of these collections of candies what do you think is the most? Which is the most diverse? So go ahead and throw those in the chat, and then we'll do the same, and we'll have a little discussion about it. C. Okay. Everybody's saying, oh, lots of C's. Okay. An E. Okay. C or E. Karen's out there like, guys, I have something to say. I love that. And that's, Karen, I meant to get you in the last round, but can you just say a little bit more about,
Sure.
what you're talking about here?
So, you can go by color, you can go by texture, you can go by taste, you can go by roundness, you can go by shape. So what is your definition of diversity? What does that mean to you? So in a sense, you can go, you can take a look at all these things, right? And you can go by color, and where A would not be as diverse as, let's say, G, just using that one as an example. You can go by taste, right? So it's really hard to definitively say this one's more diverse than that one, depending on your definition for each category. So, you have some that are broken or more that are broken, maybe an E, but they're all kind of round and they might all taste the same or all have the same texture. You have more colors maybe in the F and G, But again, taste. What is your definition? And that's where I'm going. It's like, okay, well, I can look at A. You have these little red things, and I'm thinking there's hot cinnamon. Then you have the licorice, and then you have the Swedish fish, which all have very diverse taste to them and texture and shape. So is that more diverse than the G, or are you just going by color? So, it really is what is your definition?
Right. And this, like, that's another big question that we have, right? Because so often we say we need more diversity, and all we mean is racial diversity, which is so important, but also not the only type of diversity that we need to address or to talk about. And so basically what I'm asking you to do is prioritize what you think is the most important thing that divides something from something else, or the most important thing that brings something together, right? And that is the big part of this question that I think we are consistently doing when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion is we are prioritizing different intersections over others. All right, Dr. Mike.
I wanted to just add a little bit to that, because there are definitely lots of different definitions and people might be looking at different things, but there also are a lot of things that you can't tell by looking. You don't know, for none of these candies do I know how much their parents make, or where they live, or whether they have big family or a small family, or lots of friends or no friends. So there's a whole bunch of things that impact who you are as an individual, that no matter how closely you look at shape and size and color and other things, you can't see those things, but they need to count also.
Right. So if we had a lot longer time, one of the questions that I ask is like, which one of these is the most equitable? And the answer is they cannot be equitable, because equity comes from this system of power and privilege. We can guess, some of the metaphor of what any of these mean, and guess what? They don't mean anything. I just picked candies that I thought were good, but we don't know what if the red candies have the most social power. We don't know those pieces. So yes, Dr. Mike, you are absolutely right. We cannot tell some of those pieces, and yet we are still sometimes as folks with campers called to make sure that everybody feels safe when we don't know the full picture. We don't know someone's background, we don't know someone's traumas, we don't know how much their parents make, maybe. And we still have to make sure that we're holding space for that and making it safe for folks. All right, so great. We have some disagreement and some agreement. So tell me if anybody would like to hop on and talk about why they felt like C was the most diverse.
Yeah, I went with C because it seems to have the most variety. It's got licorice, the fish, M&Ms, and I think some jelly beans in there. So it's the hodgepodge of everything. I don't think there was any other one that wasn't included from the other categories I could see in the picture.
Perfect. So a little bit of each.
Yeah.
A little bit of each. Yep. All right. What is the argument for E?
I can hop in if you want.
Yeah.
I was looking at I was torn between C and E, and the reason I went for E over C is that, yes, there's lots of different candies, but they all seem to be relatively the same color, whereas E has very different colors. There seems to be different sizes. There's some broken ones in there. So it seems as though they're different candies as well.
Yes, perfect. Any other thoughts for E? Okay, so let me ask you this. If you are a green M&M, where do you feel more comfortable, C or E? If candies are people, we're just going to pretend.
Probably E.
And why? And go ahead.
I think just because it has more M&Ms, more of the same type of candy.
Right. So when you think about where people feel comfortable in social places, it is going to depend very much on who they are and the intersections of their identity. So even though we might say C is the most diverse, which again, there are no right answers, there are no wrong answers. If you are not a red candy, you probably feel less comfortable there as an M&M in the red candy plus than you would in the M&M E, where it's all M&Ms. Right? Like when you can find that commonality, it makes it a little bit easier. So let's talk about what is actually in these candies. And again, much more fun in person. But so the first one is red M&Ms, both peanut and plain, Boston baked beans, which this occurred in a training class this summer, which I loved very much. It was when we were talking about the diversity question. And one of the very young staff members, I said, what is the most diverse? And they said A, and I was surprised by that answer because they're all the same color and nobody ever says A until they said, well, Boston baked beans are a vegetable. They're not even a candy because generationally, they'd never eaten a Boston baked bean. And I was like, that's mind blowing. So you think about that, like even our perceptions of something can change the way we think about them based on our ages and our experiences with those people or those objects as it were here. All right, so red Starburst jelly beans, Twizzlers, Swedish Fish, and Red Hots. Something I love about the Red Hot when this is done in person, and I'm going to have to give it away since you're not munching on candy right now, is every now and then somebody thinks they're getting a Skittle and they get a Red Hot. And think about that experience, right? Like we're looking at all of these candies and they're all red candies. So that means they have to taste like red fruits because the majority of them do. And then you get a Red Hot and you're surprised by that because we have made a judgment on the red candies that they will all be sweet and fruity or Boston baked beanie. And then we get a Red Hot. So think about the way that plays into your experiences with different social groups as well. Do we have moments, and staff are so funny about this because I feel like every camp I ever worked at about midsummer when everybody's slightly tired, maybe a little bit more open to chatting with people, they all have this conversation about like, when I met you, I thought blah, 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 blah. And it's just something that is kind of this human nature thing that we make these judgments. And those judgments in many ways are often made to keep us safe. But we also have to be flexible to kind of come away from those judgments. So we're aware that we might be getting a Red Hot. So B is an assortment of Starburst jelly beans. C is mostly the same as A with a few different colored M&Ms. And D is mostly the same as A with like two candies of different colors. And I think it's really important in those moments because I think often that is the makeup, we often see of our campers and our staff in many spaces. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, but the M&Ms, we've got caramel M&Ms, plain M&Ms, peanut M&Ms, many M&Ms, peanut butter M&Ms, crispy M&Ms, and mint M&Ms. And the thing that I love about the mint M&M is this little gem that is so applicable is that the mint M&M, if you put it in with the other M&Ms, guess what happens? Everything tastes like mint. Everything tastes like mint. And you think about how, when we're talking about diversity, equity, representation, all of these pieces, when you have someone who has such a strong flavor, it can affect the way other people perceive their intersections, their own intersections, all of these pieces. And it's always important to remember that peer pressure is both good and bad at times, right? Like positive peer pressure can really help folks find their way and understand community rules and not like arbitrary rules that kind of exist in society, but community rules that make us all better people in a community. And then when you think about the mint M&M, yes, when you think about the mint M&M, thinking about how we harness that. So yes, let's get back, Spot. I want to answer that question. I think that is an awesome question to answer. And then how do I do this exercise in person, yes, everybody gets to actually, I haven't done it in person in so long, but most of it is very small group work, where they have kind of a group they're with and they get a bag of all of these different candies. And I put this up on the screen. They get to eat them, which really does change the way they get to interact with the pieces of it. It's a great staff training exercise that I've loved doing with my staffs over the years. So F, nobody usually says F for anything. It's just kind of left out. Starburst, jelly beans, and plain M&Ms. And then G is just plain M&Ms. But like you all have pointed out, it's not just plain M&Ms. Like there are different levels of M&Mness and brokenness that you kind of have in that space. So let's get back to Spot's question, because I have not asked this question before, and I would really like to know what you all are thinking. And the question is, what group looks the most isolating? Like, which one of these groups would you feel would be the most isolating if you were to kind of enter that group? And I definitely have a thought about this. A, okay. Okay, some A's. Jen. A or G? A, but Spot, I'm going to need to hear your feelings about D. That's a leading question. All right, so if you said A, were there reasons about why you said A?
I said A because everything in it's red. So if you're not red, you don't belong, or, I don't.
Right. And that goes back to that question of who are you? Like, whether you feel isolated or not might be directly related, or will be directly related to the intersections of your identity. Like Jen kind of mentioned here, assuming I'm not a red candy, right? So if you are a red candy, A might not feel isolating. But if you're an apple, A still might feel isolating because you're the only, actual fruit in the bunch. All right. Spot, tell me about your feelings about D, if you don't mind. You can do it over text or in out loud.
Yeah, no, it's good. So D, just visually, I feel bad for the blue, the yellow, and the green ones.
Mhm.
They're the only ones in there. So like doing a visual test of the crowd, those would be the staff or the campers that I would like make sure are connecting and are fitting in for better or worse. Like those are the ones that would got my attention off the bat.
Yeah, right. So there's this cultural narrative, right? That like, it is so good to be the first, like it is so good to be the Jackie Robinson, right? But it is hard. It's really hard. It's hard to be the only one. It's hard when people don't necessarily know how to treat you or what that looks like. And while you might get to kind of own that firstness, it's also very, very difficult. And when I look at D, I have that same kind of feeling of, right, like, and then there's also this impulse, like all of the candies that aren't red candies are automatically going to fit together, even though they all have very differences as well. All right, so B, anybody thinking B? Okay, I had some.
Yeah, I was thinking B or maybe G because they look like they're all the same type of candy. So there's different colors, and in G there's some that are broken, but they're all M&Ms, and B looks like all jelly beans. So again, depending on Karen's point about how you're defining the diversity, if you are an apple in a room full of different kinds of nuts, that might be more isolating. But
Right. Yes, wonderful. And yeah, we could talk about this activity all day, but I want to move forward just a little bit. I think those were incredible observations, and thank you all so much. So often when I'm doing Zoom meetings, nobody wants to talk, and this has been just absolutely delightful. So let's talk a little bit about kind of the beyond of diversity, right? So long we've talked about diversity and inclusion. Diversity only states who's in the room. Who is in the room, right? Just because you have people in the room doesn't mean that they are included. Inclusion meaning, is this environment for everyone to belong? So you can have a whole different, vast amounts of diversity in a room, but what's going to ultimately decide if people are included is kind of the way we treat them or the way we invite them into power sharing. So what we'd like to be talking about now is equity. So when you talk about diversity, instead of just saying like, let's get a diverse staff, let's just go out and find them. Where do we find them? Well, let's go to this college because they have this kind of person, or let's go to this club because that's instead what we should be asking ourselves is what conditions in our community or in our environment have we kind of allowed to be here that makes one group the perpetual majority. And that could be socioeconomic conditions, that could be practices. If somebody doesn't feel like they're safe in your space, it doesn't matter how often you try to recruit in spaces that they're in, they're not going to feel safe in your space or have access to your space in many cases. And then justice, which goes beyond inclusion, is asking us whose safety is being sacrificed and minimized to allow others to be comfortable maintaining dehumanizing views, right? So we so often talk about inclusion of everyone, but there are moments and often where we can't include everyone because there are some folks who have such polar opposite feelings that this group doesn't want this group to be in. So what do you do with that? And those are the really hard questions that we have to ask ourselves to really do the equity and justice work that makes everybody feel safe in our camps. So I'm going to skip through this because you guys did such a good job talking about the jelly beans. But this is kind of the continuum, right? Like there's a continuum from you are absolutely not allowed here to you are allowed here. And then you are welcomed here, right? We have done specific things to ensure that you have access to the space in ways that, give you an impactful experience, all of these pieces. The next part is not just we're thinking about it, but when we built this space, when we built this program, we had you in mind. I talk a lot about retrofitting, especially for trans equity, because most of our camps, the vast majority, unless you're starting a camp like right now, today, and even sometimes still, our camps were built in very, very binary ways. So if you've ever retrofitted anything in plumbing, it's difficult because you have to connect one thing that's here and one thing that's here in ways that it wasn't originally intended. So rethinking through how do we rebuild while also still remaining operational, so that we're taking into account the real lived experiences of folks who are pretty systematically left out, not only in camping, but in many, many other places. And then the best, right, like the ultimate is not only was it built with you in mind, but it was also built in collaboration with people like you. So who is at the table, who has a voice, who's making these decisions? I often talk about, so when Sally Ride went to space, I don't know if any of you all know this, Sally Ride, the first female astronaut to go into space, the NASA rocket scientists sent her with 100 tampons. 100. They were only gone for a week. So because there were no women in the room, to help sculpt that decision. So you're always going to have blind spots when you don't have people with lived experience who can kind of advise some of those practices. So as you're thinking about developing practices to handle racial inequity, religious inequity, class inequity, gender inequity, all of these pieces, it is so wildly important that you have someone from that community at your table. And not only that, but we have to honor their experiences and their voices in ways that certainly make them part of the collaboration in building the program. Problem solving for equity is different than just regular problem solving, because again, when we make a judgment, so people so often say, go with your gut instinct. But unfortunately, kind of as we talk about with the way the system was built, our gut instincts are very rooted in bias, the bias that we've been taught in our culture and in our life. So when we make decisions, especially in these, high tension justice moments, we want to always make sure we're considering these 5 questions. And this framework was adapted by Smore Melanin, who's a group that I work very closely with, who's doing racial inequity work in the camping field. And they base it on the Empowering Educators Toolkit. But the framework, so asking yourself, when I chose to act, my response to this problem, whose voice did I center? When I was making my decisions, did I take into consideration the most vulnerable folks, or was I thinking about the way the parents would react, or this camper would react, or our board would react? Whose voices are we centering when we're making these decisions? Who's missing? Who in the situation is missing from the conversation that maybe should have been part of the conversation as we're choosing a path forward? Who is this going to affirm? And does it add affirmation to folks who don't often have it in social power structures? Who will this silence is also an important question to ask. And then who will this make feel like an outsider? Thinking about how we problem solve. So I wanted to apply this framework, and this is a new scenario that I'm really kind of excited about. And we're going to have to look at it kind of from an intersectional lens, because there's more going on than just gender inequity or racial inequity. It's both, and we can't not take both into account. So I'm going to read this to you, and then I'm going to do a broad response of what I would have said. And then we can kind of talk through that, and then we'll do some questions. So the scenario is you have a group of 8 and 9-year-olds in a cabin on the girls' side of camp. Their counselor is named Freddie. And although Freddie was assigned female at birth, they are now using they, them pronouns and going by the name Freddie, which differs from the name that they used at camp last summer, which is the name that their parents assigned to them. Freddie is very nervous about telling the campers, but you lead them as an empowering camp director and how to share this with their campers in ways that will make them feel safe. The campers are totally cool, because kids are going to be a little bit more cool with this than we ever imagine. And so they start excitedly asking to use they, them pronouns in different names. Many of them, they just want to use their middle name. They feel that's a cool name for them. Some of them want to use a name like Shark Bite and Speed Bump. And then we have a white camper who asks to go by the name Bon Quay Quay. All the campers start laughing and calling each other these new names. And Freddie comes to you as the camp director, and Freddie is very upset. So they feel like all the campers are making light of something that was very hard to share. They ask you what, if anything, that they should do. So whenever we have a situation like this, the first recommendation that I always make is take a second. You don't have to answer this question immediately. This is a loaded situation. And oftentimes when we are we get a lot of information thrown at us, we get very much into that kind of fight or flight mode, and we're not thinking. And this is going to take some high execution skills for thinking. So just taking, say, something to the effect of, Freddie, this sounds really, really important. And I'm going to take just a second to think about it. I will be out in 5 minutes and we can chat about it, because I really want to be able to help you in the situation. Just giving yourself that 5 minutes can be invaluable. I say the same thing about about when you have angry parents coming at you about any issue, always taking 5 minutes. So you can prepare yourself from whatever conversation that you're going to have is, again, get your thoughts together. Then you're on a little bit of more solid ground and you're able to engage in ways that are going to be helpful. So that is my first advice. Always take 5 minutes, think about your response, and really think about what we're going to do. So this is my response. I did this, I wrote this scenario, and somebody actually asked me the scenario in a seminar last week, and I loved it so much I wanted to share it. So the 5 steps that I would start with is the first thing. Anytime somebody comes with you with giant feelings, the most important thing to do is validate their feelings. This is probably very, very hard for Freddie. This is something they have been working on for years to share. So we want to make sure that we validate those feelings, and then, hold space for those feelings, and also try to see if you can get Freddie to understand that if a lot of times our campers, we are the coolest people in the world to them, and there's going to be some mimicry there, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. You might have a room full of kids that have maybe only one of them or 2 of them or 3 of them have been thinking about this before, or will come to think about this in the future, and you've just given them the language to talk about it in ways that maybe they wouldn't have had before. And I would do a little bit more work to kind of say, do you feel like it's mockery, or is it that they're really, really excited? Are you more upset because you think they're mocking you, or because this was really hard for you and it's so easy for them? Then I would work to collaborate with them on how to address the appropriation of the microaggressive cross-cultural name Bonkwekwe. So that, I feel like, is something that crosses a line. And I have some sample scripts for how to kind of talk about that with your campers. How can I help you have this conversation with them while you still feel emotional safe? Can we get your co-counselor involved? Do you want me to help you talk to them? Do you want me to just kind of give you the tool to talk about them? And that's, again, step 4 is supporting them and how they want to have that conversation. So it is a learning conversation. If Freddie and their co-counselor are young folks, this might be a time to help them with the language, but it also might be a time to say, like, this pretty high level stuff, let me support you through this in really empathetic ways. Then what I would do is I would check in with Freddie and the co-counselor together later after the conversation has happened. So check in with them together, and then check in with them separately to make sure that they're feeling okay about the discussion that was had, and especially with Freddie feeling a little bit vulnerable in the beginning of the conversation, making sure that they still feel good about their experience at camp, that they still feel prepared to empower young folks. And if there's anything else that you can do, or any resources you connect with, we can do that in kind of that step 5. So it looks like somebody had a question.
Yes, I did.
Yeah. Hi, Jane.
Hi. My question is, as the WISE camp director, how did you help Freddie explain in a age appropriate way to 8 and 9-year-old children about their changing their name and what that means? Because that, to me, impacts upon how the children respond,
right? Because
they need to integrate what they've heard.
Yes. I think anytime, I'm very pro honesty and natural introduction with kids. I think saying something to the effect of, my name's Freddie. I use they, them pronouns, which means that you can call me they, them when you're not using my name. And I know that I used XYZ name last year, but this is the one that makes me feel most comfortable. And that is it. I think so often we want to overcomplicate it. And, it doesn't have to be a whole discussion or a seminar or a PowerPoint. Just a really simple to the point sample script. And, you know, depending on the moment that you're in, the moment that those campers are experiencing this, you know, and then you pivot, right? And if they have questions, you know, they can ask later, or, you know, we can have a conversation about it. But making sure that Freddie understands that they don't have to share anything that they don't want to share, right? Like if they want to be called Freddie, they want to use they, them pronouns, that can be the end of the discussion. And I think that's really important to model to kids, is that, you know, this is something that's really important to me. And that's really the extent of what you need to know about it. And I'm so excited to be your camp counselor. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Are there any other thoughts about this scenario, or did anybody else have a completely different reaction that I'm totally open to hearing, because I'm great with feedback? Millie, what you got for me?
Well, it's not a different reaction. There's a very old joke where Johnny says to his parents, "Where did I come from?" And they gave him the whole detail of sex and everything.
Yes.
And Johnny said, "That's funny. Susie comes from Detroit."
Yes, exactly. Right. Like answer the questions that you're asked. And then, you know, kids are so naturally curious. And when if we don't share with them honestly, like there is this underlying message of this is something that is controversial. This is something that we shouldn't talk about. And right, like it kind of gets at that shame piece of like, I can't talk about this and you shouldn't talk about this. And, you know, and then it just kind of cycles. But you're right. Like I use they, them pronouns, and that is it. That's it. And that's cool. Jen, what you got for me?
Kind of a mix of some of the stuff that was in your other video from yesterday. I don't know how many people had a chance to watch it, but if you haven't, it's fantastic. Kind of thinking some of that kind of with this scenario. When talking about pronouns, I think that you had mentioned in the other video that even like within a welcome circle, that you give the opportunity to share pronouns if they want to, and if they wanted to say that later or anything like that. Is how do we normalize this? Because it seems like with this scenario, if Freddie was having this conversation just within cabin mates, and then this kind of, you know, escalated within a cabin, versus normalizing it from the very beginning and having it be part of a welcome and stuff. How do we navigate that?
I think you're exactly right. I think that it shouldn't have to be Freddie's announcement, right? Like it should just be part of the flow of, you know, you're having your opening day circle. You invite folks to share their name, their favorite pizza topping, and their pronoun. The more we normalize it, the more it is normalized. So what's the most comfortable way to do it? It's not part of our language. It's not part of our current introduction tradition. So it's going to be uncomfortable for a while. And also it's the only way that we can change this piece of our world. And if you haven't seen the video, using somebody's name and pronouns, a trans kid's name and pronouns accurately can cut their suicide risk in half. It's such an easy, hard thing to do. So again, when it feels uncomfortable, it's okay that it feels uncomfortable. And also, we got to do it, even if it feels uncomfortable, to make some kids who are pretty vulnerable feel a little bit more safe. Is that helpful?
Yeah, it's because I think you're exactly right in the fact that that isn't something that has been part of the forefront of our mind to include in introductions, and it should be. Right. And you know, making sure that that safe space exists from step one, because I'm thinking of a camper example that I had, and kind of relating it to this, and like, because it didn't go well. We got, you know, we heard from a parent after the fact, not during. We heard it after the fact, and there was so many like, oh, there's so many different signs. Should we have done this? Should we have sent that at that point? Should we? Because we don't want to out somebody by any means.
Sure.
And so I'm just trying to think as far as like with this scenario, the fact that Freddie felt comfortable in this cabin setting to share it is great, but whether or not could that be avoided just even by normalizing it earlier? And is it better in a big setting versus a little setting? Or We kind of just go with what feels right.
Yeah, I think it's always better in a small setting. I'm not a big fan of circles where like if all I don't know how many people are here, if all 30, 45 of us, if I said, okay, everybody share your name and your pronoun, by person number 5, we're not paying attention. You know, not only that, but like if you have enough social anxiety, instead of listening to what everybody else is saying, you're waiting for your turn so you can get it over. So those kind of icebreakers, I feel like build more ice. Than break down ice. So having smaller groups, and also that gives kids the practice of sharing their pronouns. And I really do feel like in the coming years, this is going to be part of our culture. It's creeping in already. You know, when I was working at the Girl Scout 5 years ago, I asked them to let us put pronouns in our signatures, and they were like, oh my gosh, what do you think this is? You know, like Woodstock. And I was like, no, this is coming. And now everybody's doing it, right? Now it's your bank teller has their pronoun in their signature. Like this is the way cultural shifts are happening. So I think it's coming. So I think the smaller groups is a really cool way to integrate it, where you only have, 4 or 5 kids and they're practicing it where they feel comfortable. So I think, again, that part, that's built in your culture, right? Like that's baked into your culture. And not only that, but I also always advise people to make sure that if your community would be receptive, that we're going to allow kids to use the pronouns that feel good to them. And that shouldn't be a surprise, right? Because parents often, when they have biases, will hide behind the fact that it was a surprise, instead of the fact that they have a bias. Like, well, nobody told me we were going to be accepting people for who they were. And they don't say it like that. They don't say it like that, but that's what they're saying. So I don't think we ever apologize for inclusive practices. Sometimes we have to apologize that we weren't as upfront that we were going to be including of all people.
Going back to our scenario, and you have now talking to the children, and they've started to use they, them, or other names. So would one of the ways you help them understand the difference between what they're doing and what Freddie was doing, would you say something like, is that what makes you feel best about yourself, using those names? Or are you just doing this because it's fun to sort of change names and role play and that kind of thing?
Thank you, Jen. This is what I would say. All right. So because I want to support any kid who uses any name that makes them feel good, safe, and whole, except there's a couple of exceptions. That is, again, microaggressive, culturally insensitive names. And anytime it's the name, like nobody can say, I want to go by Jesus. Nobody can say, I want to go by Allah. Like these are names that because of the value to different folks, we're not going to use. So I would say to directly relate to that, you know how we don't paint our faces black because it can be harmful to Black people? Choosing a name like that might also upset someone. So if you don't want to be called your name, choose a name that you like that doesn't upset any other friends. It can be any name. It can be something like Peter, Leonard, Penelope, Banana Pants, Sith Lord, Water Hose, or Veggie Burger. But it can't be a name that sounds like it's in someone else's language or from someone else's culture. It also can't be the name of someone else's God. Again, if they want to go by a different name, they might go by that name for a week and be like, that was fun, and go back to the name that they were using. And good for them, right? Like, I don't know how many of you, regardless of your gender identity, feel some kind of way about your name. And I think it's okay to explore that. In this scenario, when I was talking through this with the camp, I did have one professional camp person who said, the only thing that we tell our kids, we say, you can change your name as many times as you want to while you're at camp, if it's something that feels good to you. However, names are also really important for safety. So if you're about to fall into a cartoon size hole and I yell, hey, Banana Pants, and you don't respond, we're going to have a problem. So we're going to do our best to use that name, but you also have to be able to respond to it, because, our names are wired for our brains are wired for names that we're called. So we do have to take that into consideration as well. So it's kind of like the practical piece, and then also the flexibility piece that you want to affirm folks, regardless of their gender identity, if they want to use a different name or pronoun. Okay, I think that is all the time that we have. This has been so lovely. And yes, I think that is all I have for today. So I'll put my email in the chat if anybody wants to get a hold of me after this or has any additional questions. Yes, and it was so lovely. Thank you all for participating. I hate silence. So thanks for not doing that today. This has been great. All right, I'm going to kick it back over to our session host.
Thank you so much, Chris. Everybody give a big thank you to Chris. Give a little clap, give a little of those. Thank you for your time, for your insights, and also for your suggestions on this topic. So helpful. Also, I do want to let you all know too, that if there was nuggets from this session that you said, oh, I can't remember that. What is that? This is being recorded. It should be posted up tomorrow. And my understanding is that on the COCA-Con website, when you go into there, you can go to this day. You can see that there's a little blue tab in there that says the recording. And I believe they're up there for probably about, I was told 14 days. So
I heard until February.
Well, there you go. That might have expanded since I first asked. So it'll be somewhere between 14 days and February, when it'll be available. But anyway, just to let you know that. And once again, thank you, Chris. I want to also thank Becky. I want to thank all of you guys for participating. And I hope you all have a good rest of your COCA-Con session.
Oh, Millie, you're muted if you're trying to say something.
Thank you, Becky. I was saying hello to my camper.
Yes,
hello.
And then I love it. I hadn't seen her a long 10.
And yeah, it has been a while. This has absolutely made my day. So
Get in touch.
good to
You have
see
my
you.